my background is in painting. It's kind of, you could say it's my mother language. But at some point in developing my work over time, during my studies also, I started to become more interested in what a surface can tell you, how that conversation can take place between materials and content. I started working with tapestries in 2015. And at that stage, I'd been working a lot with weavers in Turkey, so very traditional Anatolian weavers. And I was working a lot with photography. I had this very thick material and then this very thin material. And I thought, okay, if I have more technology at hand, what can happen with bringing these layers together? And that's when I came across the tapestry weavers in Flanders. It's image-based. You have an image, a digital image. It's a very high-tech weaving interface where their looms are connected to the computers, and there's a lot of haptic that takes place based on what types of yarn you choose, what colors you choose, and how the relief is, if it's a flat weave, if it's a relief weave. And so there's a long negotiation process where the image is negotiated. This aspect of technological translation from material translation was really interesting for me. I began a few years ago looking at what happens within the body in this space, what happens with the unconscious. So the bodies were becoming veiled with other information or replaced with other information as a metaphor. And that kind of brought me to looking at the potentiality of what is going on with contemporary bodies. So at this phase, what we see is it's like a stage. It's a photo from the Museum of Decorative Arts in Paris, and it's from a fashion exhibition. And the fashion exhibition encompasses 300 years of fashion. And it's not models, it's mannequins. And so I work a lot with the mannequin as a stand-in for a body, as an idealized body, but also something that's directly connected to consumerism, capitalism. I was looking at the bodies in the space in this very monumental setting, which became, in a way, painterly. I'm also very influenced by the representation of female bodies in painting in perverse forms like Picasso, Demoiselle d'Avillon, and these historical ways of framing a grouping of female bodies and what kind of charge that can have, what kind of monstrosity that can bring. And so in this case, I was looking at mostly contemporary architecture, an architecture that's being built currently, or pictures of architecture being built. So you see different buildings which are superimposed, but also replacing the bodies, but also melding with them through transparencies. And this is interwoven in the threads. And some of the buildings actually represent the female body from experimental architecture today. Like the tall figure on the left there, this is the Premier Tower in Australia, which was built to represent Beyoncé's figure from her video Ghost. So it's actually a skyscraper that's made to have the same curves as Beyoncé. I'm also very interested in how the female body gets transcribed somehow into architecture in a strange way. And the building to the left is the Alhambra Tower in Kuwait, which is a very new building that's the largest skyscraper built with flexible concrete. So it's the use of concrete in a sculptural way using new technology. This is the biggest building in the world. So I'm looking at how materials are used in architecture and how they also can be metaphorically connected to how the female body is represented in culture and society. I don't think I've made works with male bodies, or very, very seldom. But that's my preoccupation, and this is it's my interest, probably also the thread of art history and also being a woman and looking at that gaze. But for me, it's a gaze of multidirectionality. So I'm analyzing the male gaze, but I also have my own gaze. I also have some kind of preoccupation with the feminine monstrosity, or with the danger of the feminine form. That's not directly connected to the male gaze. So I think that there's multiple layers involved, and I think that the layers are very complex, but they're interconnected and interwoven. And so the step to bring the figures into a contemporary space with contemporary architecture is also, for me, about the current climate that we have of our bodies existing in today's environment. And how are we human still? You know, what is being human going to look like in 200 years? And I'm started to become much more interested in science fiction and like narratives of post-human existence. Because these things are on the table now. Like digitality is so much more prevalent. Of course, we don't want to talk about the pandemic, but it's very prevalent in our way of thinking about how we exist in space. So there's a certain awkwardness or a certain kind of impossible construction involved in bringing these things together. And that's where the weaving comes in, because if this was a big photographic work, it would be very technocratic. But there's a certain warmth that comes from weaving, but also a certain analysis, because the layers are combined by very, very complex interweaving of threads. So there's a gelling that takes place from something very, very traditional. But that being said, the first computer language came from jacquard weaving. So there's this play between technological and organic language that I think is really interesting.